Sarah Mitchell's heart pounded as she walked through the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 304. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. She was running late, something that rarely happened in her precisely scheduled life. Her crisp navy blazer, thrown hastily over a simple white blouse, still looked professional despite her rush to make it to traffic court. The courtroom was already packed with other defendants, their whispered conversations creating a soft hum in the high-ceilinged room. Sarah slipped into an empty seat in the back row, pulling out her phone to quickly check the numerous work emails that had accumulated during her drive. As the CEO of a legal technology startup, every minute away from the office meant delayed decisions and waiting team members. At exactly 9:30 a.m., a court officer's voice rang out. "All rise, the Honorable Judge Richard Harrison presiding." Judge Harrison entered the courtroom, his black robes flowing behind him. At 62, his silver hair and stern expression gave him an imposing presence. He had spent 20 years on the bench, and his reputation for running a strict courtroom was well known throughout the county. As the morning progressed, Sarah watched the judge handle case after case. His approach was mechanical, efficient, and decidedly unsympathetic. He handed out fines with the regularity of a metronome, rarely looking up from his papers to truly see the people standing before him. "Case number 247, Sarah Mitchell," the clerk called out. Sarah stood up, smoothing her black pencil skirt as she walked to the podium. She carried herself with quiet confidence, despite the butterflies in her stomach. This was different from presenting to investors or speaking at tech conferences. Here, in this courthouse, she felt strangely small. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had heard every excuse imaginable. "You are charged with running a red light at the intersection of Broadway and 5th on April 15th at 8:45 p.m. How do you plead?" "Your Honor, while I acknowledge being at that intersection, I would like to explain the circumstances," Sarah began, her voice clear and measured. She reached into her leather portfolio to pull out printed screenshots from the traffic camera footage she had requested. Judge Harrison cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Ms. Mitchell, this is a simple matter. The traffic camera clearly shows your vehicle running the light. A simple guilty or not guilty will suffice." Sarah took a deep breath. "Your Honor, if I could just show you the evidence I prepared." "Ms. Mitchell," the judge interrupted again, his tone sharp. His eyes barely flicked up to look at her, missing the quiet determination in her expression. "This court has a full docket today. We don't have time for lengthy explanations about a straightforward traffic violation." The dismissive tone in his voice was unmistakable. Several observers in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the all-too-familiar scene playing out before them. "In that case, Your Honor, I plead not guilty," Sarah stated firmly. Judge Harrison finally looked up, his steely gray eyes meeting hers for the first time. Something in her composed demeanor seemed to irritate him further. "Ms. Mitchell, the evidence is clear. The fine for running a red light is $300. Given your apparent reluctance to acknowledge your violation, I'm adding court costs of $150. Sarah stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her. She had faced tougher audiences in boardrooms across the country, but this felt different. This wasn't about her credentials or her achievements. Here, she was just another face in traffic court, being judged not by the content of her character or the merit of her case, but by quick assumptions and hasty conclusions. "That will be all, Ms. Mitchell," Judge Harrison said dismissively, already looking down at the next case file. As Sarah walked back to her seat, she pulled out her phone, quickly sending a message to her assistant to reschedule her morning meetings. She had planned to head straight to the office after court, where her team was waiting to finalize the launch of their newest legal aid platform. Instead, she decided she would stay and observe the rest of the morning's proceedings. Sometimes, she reminded herself, the best innovations came from witnessing the system's flaws firsthand. Little did Judge Harrison know that his dismissive treatment of the woman before him would soon lead to one of the most humbling and transformative experiences of his judicial career. Judge Richard Harrison settled into his leather chair with a weary sigh, loosening his black robes as he prepared to review the morning's cases. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his wood-paneled chambers, a space that had been his sanctuary for the past 2 decades. A half-empty cup of coffee sat cold on his desk, forgotten during the busy morning session. Your Honor. Linda Peters, his clerk of 15 years, knocked softly on the doorframe. Her usually calm demeanor seemed slightly nervous as she clutched a tablet in her hands. There's something you might want to see. Harrison barely looked up from his stack of case files. What is it, Linda? We got that backlog of custody hearings to prepare for. It's about one of the defendants from this morning, sir, Sarah Mitchell. Linda stepped forward, placing the tablet on his desk. She was in for the traffic violation. Mitchell? Harrison frowned, trying to recall the face among the dozens he'd seen that morning. The one who tried to argue about the red light camera. Yes, sir. Linda hesitated before continuing. Well, you should probably see this yourself. On the tablet screen was an article from the State Bar Journal. The headline read, Legal Tech Pioneer Sarah Mitchell Revolutionizes Access to Justice. Below it was a professional photograph of the same woman who had stood in his courtroom that morning, though in the photo she looked far more commanding in a tailored suit, standing before a crowd at a legal technology conference. Harrison's throat went dry as he began to read. The article detailed how Mitchell, a Harvard Law graduate, had left a prestigious position at a top law firm to found Justice Connect, a groundbreaking legal technology company. Her platform had already helped over 100,000 low-income individuals access legal resources and representation. There's more, Linda said quietly, scrolling to show him another article. This one was from the American Bar Association, naming Mitchell as one of the 40 under 40 most influential legal innovators in the country. Her company had recently secured $50 million in funding to expand their services nationwide. Harrison loosened his tie, feeling uncomfortably warm. He remembered his dismissive tone, the way he barely looked at her as she tried to present her evidence. The memory now made him squirm in his chair. She's scheduled to give the keynote speech at next month's Judicial Technology Conference, Linda added, her voice gentle but pointed. The same conference you're supposed to attend. Harrison stood up, walking to his window that overlooked the courthouse parking lot. He watched as people hurried up and down the steps, each carrying their own stories, their own dignity. How many other times had he failed to truly see the person standing before him? Pull up the footage from this morning's session, he said finally, turning back to his desk. I want to review it. Linda connected the tablet to his larger monitor, and soon Harrison was watching himself on screen. The difference in how he treated various defendants became painfully obvious. His tone, his body language, the time he allowed each person to speak. All of it showed patterns he'd never noticed before. When he reached Sarah Mitchell's case, he could barely watch himself. The prejudice in his behavior was glaringly obvious now. He dismissed her attempt to present evidence without even a glance, something he realized he did far too often with certain defendants. Cancel my afternoon appointments, Harrison said, his voice heavy. And Linda? Could you find out if there are any upcoming judicial bias training programs? I think it's time I attended one. Linda smiled softly, relieved at his reaction. Already looking into it, sir. As his clerk left the chamber, Harrison remained at his desk, staring at Sarah Mitchell's photograph. She had achieved more in her young career than many lawyers did in a lifetime, yet he treated her like just another number on his docket. He pulled out a legal pad and began to write. First, a letter of apology to Ms. Mitchell. Then, notes for what would become a proposal to the Judicial Review Board about mandatory bias training for all judges in the district. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote, but his determination grew with each word. The afternoon light faded from his chambers as Harrison continued working, knowing that this day would mark a turning point in his career, not because of his authority on the bench, but because of what he'd failed to see from behind it. The modern glass building that housed Justice Connect stood in stark contrast to the old courthouse where Sarah Mitchell had stood just hours earlier. Inside her corner office on the 15th floor, Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing the final details of their latest software update. The traffic court incident still lingered in her mind, but she'd had more pressing matters to address. Ms. Mitchell? Her assistant James poked his head through the door. The development team is ready for the demonstration, and there's a reporter from Legal Tech Today waiting in the conference room for your interview. Sarah nodded, straightening her blazer as she stood. Thank you, James. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. She gathered her tablet and notes, preparing to showcase the technology that was already changing thousands of lives. The main conference room was packed with people when she arrived. Developers, legal advisors, and community representatives sat around the large oval table, while others lined the walls. At the front of the room, a large screen displayed the homepage of Justice Econex's new platform. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah began, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence she'd shown in traffic court. "Today, we're launching something that could have helped the 27 people I watched struggle through traffic court this morning." She tapped her tablet, and the screen behind her came to life. "This is version 3.0 of our legal navigator system. It uses artificial intelligence to help people understand their legal rights and options in simple, everyday language." The demonstration proceeded smoothly as Sarah showed how the system could guide users through common legal situations. She clicked through various scenarios: traffic violations, landlord disputes, small claims issues, each one presented in clear, straightforward steps that anyone could follow. "Last month alone," Sarah continued, "our platform helped over 15,000 people who couldn't afford traditional legal representation. People like Mrs. Rodriguez, a grandmother who used our system to fight an unfair eviction notice, or Mr. Chen, who successfully appealed a parking ticket that would have cost him a week's wages." The reporter from Legal Tech Today, Lisa Wong, leaned forward in her seat. "Ms. Mitchell, what inspired you to create this system?" Sarah paused, considering the question. "I saw too many people being rushed through our legal system without understanding their rights or options. Just this morning, I witnessed multiple cases where people clearly needed guidance but couldn't afford it." As she spoke, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the State Judicial Office, confirming her upcoming keynote speech at the Judicial Technology Conference. The irony wasn't lost on her. She would be speaking to a room full of judges, including some who might have dismissed her in their own courtrooms. "The really exciting part," Sarah continued, pulling up a new screen, "is our latest feature. We've partnered with 50 pro bono lawyers across the state to provide free consultations through our platform. When our AI detects a case that needs human expertise, it automatically schedules a virtual meeting with an available attorney." The demonstration continued as Sarah showed how the system could automatically generate legal documents, provide deadline reminders, and even offer guidance on courtroom etiquette. Each feature had been carefully designed to address the barriers she'd observed in countless courtrooms. "Ms. Mitchell," another attendee spoke up, "I heard you're being considered for the American Bar Association's Innovation Award. How does it feel to be recognized as a leader in legal technology?" Sarah smiled diplomatically. "The recognition is appreciated, but what matters most is the impact. Every day, we receive messages from people who were able to navigate the legal system successfully because of this platform. That's the real achievement." As the presentation concluded, Sarah noticed a notification on her tablet, a message from the courthouse. Judge Harrison's clerk had sent an unexpected email requesting a meeting. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly as she read the message, but her expression remained composed. "One last thing," she addressed the room. "Next month, we're launching a pilot program with 3 county courts. They'll be integrating our platform directly into their systems, making it available right in the courthouse." The room burst into applause, but Sarah was already thinking ahead. Perhaps Judge Harrison's court would be interested in becoming the 4th pilot location. After all, transforming the system worked better from within than from the outside. As the crowd filed out, Sarah remained in the conference room, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, in an old courthouse, people were still struggling to navigate a complex legal system. But today, like every day, she was one step closer to changing that reality. Judge Harrison sat alone in his study at home, the clock on his desk showing 2:17 a.m. Sleep had refused to come, chased away by the images from the courthouse security footage he'd spent hours reviewing. His usual evening routine of a quiet dinner and reading had been abandoned in favor of intense self-examination. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated his troubled face as he watched another recording from his courtroom. This time, it was a case from last week. He noticed how he gave a young white businessman nearly 10 minutes to explain a speeding ticket, while earlier that same day he had cut off an elderly Hispanic woman after barely 30 seconds. "Margaret would be so disappointed in me," he whispered to himself, glancing at the photo of his late wife on his desk. She had been a civil rights attorney, spending her career fighting for equal justice. How had he strayed so far from the principles they once discussed over dinner every night? Harrison reached for his legal pad, already filled with notes from hours of observation. He had documented every instance of bias he could find in his recent cases, different tones of voice, varying levels of patience, subtle changes in body language. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to ignore. The judge stood up, walking to his kitchen to make another cup of tea. His house felt unusually empty tonight, the silence giving him too much space to think. As he waited for the water to boil, he remembered something Margaret used to say: "Justice isn't about being right, it's about doing right." Back in his study, Harrison opened his email and found Sarah Mitchell's professional profile. Her achievements were remarkable. Graduated top of her class from Harvard Law, turned down partnerships at prestigious firms to start Justice Connect, named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in technology and law. "And I treated her like she was wasting my time," he muttered, shaking his head. He clicked through some videos of her speaking at conferences. In one, she discussed how technology could make the legal system more equitable. Her words struck him particularly hard. Every person who enters a courtroom deserves to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance, background, or circumstances. Harrison opened a new document on his laptop and began typing. Proposal for mandatory judicial bias training program. He worked steadily, drawing from his own experience as a case study. The program would include regular review of courtroom footage, anonymous feedback from defendants, and training sessions led by experts in unconscious bias. It wouldn't be comfortable, but comfort wasn't the point. As he wrote, his phone lit up with a text from his daughter, Emily, a public defender in another state. "Dad, you up? Can we talk?" He dialed her number, and she answered immediately. "I saw Sarah Mitchell's name on tomorrow's docket for your court. Dad, do you realize who she is?" "I do now," Harrison replied quietly, "and I made a terrible mistake this morning. You know, she's revolutionizing access to legal services. Her platform helped 3 of my clients last month navigate their cases successfully." Harrison listened as his daughter explained more about Mitchell's work. Each word made him more aware of how his biases had affected countless people over the years. "Dad," Emily's voice softened, "Mom always said you were the most fair-minded person she knew. What happened today doesn't have to define you." After ending the call, Harrison returned to his proposal with renewed purpose. At the bottom, he added a personal pledge. "I commit to reviewing my own courtroom footage weekly, seeking feedback from court staff and defendants, and publicly acknowledging my mistakes as part of the learning process." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when Harrison finally closed his laptop. He hadn't felt this tired, or this clear-headed, in years. Tomorrow would bring challenges, including figuring out how to make amends with Sarah Mitchell. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was becoming the judge Margaret had always believed he could be. As he finally headed to bed, Harrison paused by his wife's photo. "You were right, my dear," he said softly. "It's never too late to learn, to change, to do better." The State Judicial Ethics Board wasn't used to seeing judges appear voluntarily before them, especially not someone with Judge Harrison's seniority. Yet here he was, standing before the 7-member panel in their formal meeting room, his proposal for a comprehensive bias training program spread out before them. "Members of the board," Harrison began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Yesterday I made a mistake that opened my eyes to a serious problem in our courts. A problem that starts with me." The room was silent as Harrison played selected clips from his courtroom footage. He had chosen the most telling examples, including his interaction with Sarah Mitchell. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps recognizing similar patterns in their own courtrooms. "As you can see," Harrison continued, pointing to his detailed analysis, "my treatment of defendants varies significantly based on their appearance, race, and perceived social status. This isn't justice. This is bias, plain and simple." Judge Maria Rodriguez, the board's chairperson, leaned forward. "Judge Harrison, while we appreciate your honesty, why bring this to the full board? This could seriously damage your reputation." Harrison nodded, expecting this question. "Because my reputation isn't as important as fixing a broken system. I prepared a proposal for a new training program that I believe could help all of us do better." He distributed copies of his detailed plan. The program would require judges to regularly review their own courtroom footage, participate in monthly bias training sessions, and receive anonymous feedback from defendants. Most controversially, it would make these evaluations part of each judge's public record. The public's trust in our justice system is at stake, Harrison explained, clicking to a new slide showing trust ratings in the judicial system. We can't expect people to respect our decisions if we don't address our own biases. Board member Judge Thompson, known for his conservative views, spoke up. This could open us all to criticism and scrutiny. Have you considered the implications? I have, Harrison replied firmly. And I believe that's exactly what we need. Yesterday, I learned that the woman I dismissed so casually in my courtroom is actually revolutionizing access to justice through technology. How many other Sarah Mitchells have we failed to see properly? He shared more statistics, disparities in sentencing, differences in how questions were handled, variations in fine amounts for similar offenses. The numbers told a clear story of systemic bias. I'm not just proposing this program, Harrison continued, straightening his shoulders. I'm volunteering to be its first participant. My court will serve as the pilot program. Every mistake, every improvement, every lesson learned will be documented and shared. The board members exchanged glances. This was unprecedented. A judge with Harrison's reputation voluntarily putting himself under such scrutiny. And what if we find more problems? Judge Rodriguez asked. What if the scrutiny reveals deeper issues? Then we address them, Harrison said simply. We can't claim to serve justice if we're not willing to face our own injustices. He pulled out his final piece of evidence, letters from other judges who had reviewed his proposal and supported it. Among them was a powerful endorsement from the state Supreme Court's Chief Justice. I've also spoken with Sarah Mitchell, Harrison added, the woman whose case triggered this reflection. Her company, Justice Connect, has offered to provide technology that could help track and analyze our courtroom behavior patterns. The board called for a brief recess to discuss the proposal. Harrison waited in the hallway, thinking about how different this day was from his usual time in court. Here he was, being judged instead of judging. When they called him back in, Judge Rodriguez's expression was serious but approving. Judge Harrison, this board has never received a proposal quite like this. It's uncomfortable, challenging, and absolutely necessary. She paused, looking around at her fellow board members who nodded in agreement. We're approving your pilot program, with one condition. We want quarterly reports presented to this board, detailing every finding, every challenge, and every success. Harrison felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was just the beginning of a long journey, but it was a start. As he gathered his materials, he thought about his next step, preparing for the judicial conference where Sarah Mitchell would be speaking. Sometimes he realized the best way to serve justice was to admit when you'd failed to deliver it. The State Judicial Conference Center buzzed with activity as hundreds of judges and legal professionals gathered for the annual Technology Summit. Sarah Mitchell stood backstage, reviewing her presentation notes one last time. Her keynote speech about Justice Connect was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. Ms. Mitchell, a young event coordinator approached her. Judge Harrison would like to speak with you before the presentation. He's asking if he could introduce your session. Sarah paused, surprised by the request. She had received his formal letter of apology last week, but hadn't expected this. Where is he? In the speaker's preparation room, just down the hall. Sarah found Judge Harrison standing by the window, looking markedly different from the stern figure she'd encountered in traffic court. His usual black robes were replaced by a business suit, and his posture seemed less rigid, more human. Miss Mitchell, he said, turning to face her. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Judge Harrison, Sarah replied politely, maintaining her professional composure. I received your letter. I know an apology on paper isn't enough, he began, his voice carrying genuine remorse. That's why I'm here. I'd like to introduce your session today, but not with the usual professional accolades. Instead, I want to share what happened in my courtroom that day and how it led to changes in our entire judicial district. Sarah studied him carefully. You want to use our interaction as an example? Yes, Harrison nodded. The audience needs to understand that bias isn't just a theoretical concept we discuss at conferences. It's real, It happens every day, and even experienced judges like myself can be guilty of it. Sarah set her notes down on a nearby table. Tell me about these changes you mentioned. Harrison explained the new bias training program he'd initiated, showing her the preliminary data from the pilot program in his court. Your experience in my courtroom became a catalyst for real change. We've already seen a 40% increase in defendants reporting they felt heard and treated fairly. Interesting, Sarah said, pulling out her tablet. She opened a Justice to Connect dashboard showing user feedback from various courts. We'd noticed something similar. Courts that implement our system see a 50% increase in positive feedback from users, especially from minority communities. For the next few minutes, they compared notes and data. Sarah showed him how Justice Connect's AI could identify patterns in judicial behavior, while Harrison shared insights from his new training programs. What if we combined our approaches? Sarah suggested, her initial reservations giving way to professional interest. Your training program with our technology could create a more comprehensive solution. Harrison's eyes lit up. That's exactly what I was hoping to discuss. Would you be willing to work with our district as a pilot program? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room. Judge Harrison, I think we might have something significant here. The conference coordinator poked her head in. 5 minutes until the keynote. Harrison straightened his tie. Ms. Mitchell, may I introduce your session as we discussed? Yes, Sarah said, gathering her materials. But first, I have one question. That traffic ticket from your court. Dismissed, Harrison said quickly, along with a formal apology to all defendants from that day. We're reviewing every case from the past month to ensure fairness. As they walked toward the main hall, Sarah shared her screen with Harrison, showing him a preview of her presentation. She had already added a slide about their potential collaboration. The audience fell silent as Judge Harrison took the podium. His opening words caught everyone's attention. A month ago, I made a mistake that changed my entire approach to justice. Sarah watched from the side as Harrison shared their story with raw honesty. The audience, filled with judges and legal professionals, listened intently. Some nodded in recognition, perhaps seeing reflections of their own behavior. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah built upon Harrison's introduction, seamlessly connecting his personal story to the larger issues of bias in the legal system. Together, they showed how technology and personal growth could work hand in hand to create real change. After the presentation, as people crowded around to ask questions, Sarah noticed Harrison standing quietly to the side, taking notes. He caught her eye and nodded respectfully. They both knew this was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward true justice. 6 months after the judicial conference, the county courthouse had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The old building's marble hallways now featured digital kiosks running Justice Connect's software, and every courtroom was equipped with advanced monitoring systems that helped judges track their own behavior patterns. Sarah walked through the courthouse's main entrance, remembering her first visit as a defendant. Today, she was here to meet with Judge Harrison and review the progress of their pilot program. The security guard smiled in recognition. She had become a familiar face over the past months. Good morning, Ms. Mitchell. Linda Peters, Judge Harrison's clerk, greeted her warmly. The morning session just finished. You should see the data from today. It's remarkable. Sarah followed Linda into what used to be a storage room, but had been converted into their project's command center. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time statistics from various courtrooms, while a team of analysts worked quietly at their computers. Judge Harrison was already there, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied a report. He looked up as they entered. Sarah, you're just in time. We've got some interesting patterns to show you. Let me guess, Sarah said, setting down her laptop. The morning traffic court session? Harrison nodded, pulling up the data on the main screen. Watch this split-screen comparison. On the left is footage from 6 months ago. On the right is today's session. The difference was striking. In the old footage, defendants were rushed through their cases with minimal interaction. In the new footage, each person was given time to speak, their evidence was considered carefully, and the judge's body language showed active engagement. The AI system flagged 0 instances of potential bias in today's session, Harrison said proudly. And look at the feedback scores. He pulled up a chart showing defendant satisfaction ratings that had steadily climbed over the past 6 months. Sarah opened her laptop, adding this new data to their growing research database. The state Supreme Court called yesterday, she mentioned. They're interested in implementing our program across all district courts. That's fantastic, Harrison replied, but then furrowed his brow. Though I'm concerned about scaling too quickly. We should share our challenges too, not just our successes. Sarah agreed, pulling up another set of statistics. Like these resistance patterns we've seen from some judges. The data showed that about 20% of judges initially resisted the monitoring system, though most eventually came around. Exactly, Harrison said. We need to be transparent about the uncomfortable parts of this process. Real change isn't easy. They spent the next hour reviewing cases where the AI had flagged potential bias. Each instance was carefully documented, analyzed, and added to their training materials. The system wasn't just identifying problems, it was helping build solutions. A knock on the door interrupted their work. A young public defender stepped in, looking nervous. Judge Harrison? Miss Mitchell? Could I show you something? They followed her to her office, where she pulled up a case file. This client would have definitely lost his case 6 months ago. But watch what happened when I used the Justice to Connect system to prepare his defense. The video showed a recent hearing where an elderly man was able to clearly present evidence about a property dispute, guided by the AI system's preparation tools. The judge in the case, someone who had initially resisted the new program, listened patiently and ultimately ruled in the man's favor. This is exactly what we hoped for, Sarah said, making notes on her tablet. The system isn't just changing judicial behavior, it's empowering defendants to better present their cases. Back in the command center, Harrison pulled up the implementation schedule for other courthouses. We're set to launch in 3 more counties next month. The training teams are ready, and the technology infrastructure is being installed. Sarah nodded, then paused as she noticed something on one of the monitors. Look at this. She pointed to a graph showing correlations between judges' facial expressions and defendant outcomes. The AI is picking up on subtle cues we hadn't even considered. We should add this to the training module, Harrison suggested, already typing notes. Every new insight helps us build a fairer system. As they continued working, more judges stopped by to share experiences or ask questions. The command center had become a hub of learning and transformation, proving that technology and human insight could work together to create real change in the justice system. You know, Harrison said as they wrapped up their meeting, when you first appeared in my courtroom, I never imagined we'd end up here. Sarah smiled, gathering her things. Sometimes the best innovations come from the most unexpected moments of injustice. 2 years had passed since that fateful day in traffic court. The old county courthouse, once a symbol of rigid tradition, had become a national model for judicial innovation. On this bright morning, camera crews from major news networks set up their equipment outside as people filed in for a special ceremony. Inside the main courtroom, Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium, addressing a packed room of judges, lawyers, and community members. Behind her, a large screen displayed impressive statistics. Over 500,000 cases handled through Justice to Connect, bias incident reports down by 78%, and defendant satisfaction rates up by 82%. When I first walked into this courthouse 2 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room, I was just another defendant in traffic court. Today, we're showing the world what happens when we combine technology with genuine human commitment to change. Judge Harrison sat in the front row, looking quite different from the stern figure of 2 years ago. His face had softened, and he wore a small pin on his robes, a symbol of the bias awareness program he had helped create. Our success isn't just about numbers, Sarah continued, clicking to a new slide. It's about stories. Like Mrs. Chen, who used our system to successfully navigate her small business dispute, or Mr. Rodriguez, who finally got a fair hearing in his custody case thanks to our AI-assisted preparation tools. The screen shifted to show a map of the United States, with bright dots indicating every courthouse now using their integrated system. What had started in one courtroom had spread to over 200 jurisdictions across the country. Judge Harrison took his turn at the podium. 2 years ago, I was part of the problem, he admitted, his honesty drawing respectful silence from the audience. Today, I'm proud to announce that our bias training program has been adopted by the National Judicial College as part of their standard curriculum. He gestured to a group of young judges sitting together. These are our newest judges, the first class to complete their training with our integrated system. They're starting their careers with tools and awareness that took me decades to develop. The ceremony continued with demonstrations of their latest innovations. A new feature allowed real-time translation in multiple languages, while another helped judges track their tone of voice and body language during proceedings. Sarah returned to the podium to share their latest initiative. Starting next month, we're launching a free mobile app that helps people understand their rights and prepare for court appearances. No one should feel lost or powerless in our legal system. The audience burst into applause when Judge Harrison and Sarah unveiled a plaque that would hang in the courthouse entrance. It read, "Justice sees all," dedicated to ensuring every person who enters these doors is truly seen, heard, and treated with dignity. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled during the reception, a young woman approached Sarah and Judge Harrison. "I have a traffic court appearance next week," she said nervously. "I used your app to prepare." "Which courthouse?" Harrison asked kindly. "Downtown with Judge Martinez." Sarah pulled out her phone, checking something. "Judge Martinez has one of the highest fairness ratings in our system. Just remember, you have the right to be heard. The app will guide you through presenting your case clearly." The woman smiled, visibly relieved. "Thank you. It's amazing how different things are now." Later that afternoon, Sarah and Harrison sat in their command center, now expanded to take up an entire floor of the courthouse. Teams of developers, legal analysts, and training specialists worked at various stations, fine-tuning their systems and monitoring data from courts across the country. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the bustling room. "That day in traffic court." Harrison shook his head. "I was too busy not seeing what was right in front of me." He paused, watching a screen showing live feeds from various courtrooms. But that's the thing about transformation. It often starts with admitting what we failed to see. A notification popped up on the main screen, another courthouse requesting to join their program. Sarah smiled as she approved the request. "You know what the best part is? This is still just the beginning." Outside the window, the sun was setting behind the courthouse's classic columns, casting long shadows across the steps where people had sought justice for generations. Now, thanks to an unexpected encounter between a prejudiced judge and an innovative lawyer, those same steps led to a new kind of justice, one that could truly see everyone who climbed them.